Hi, Brendan Davis here. If you did not listen to last week's episode, part one of this interview with Ellen Shook, please do that to have full context for what you're going to hear today. But this does work as a standalone piece. We'll talk more about that in just a second. Welcome to If I Knew You Better. I'm Brendan Davis, your host, and today I am proud, but also a bit overwhelmed, frankly, to bring you part two of my interview with my mom, Ellen Shook. I talked extensively last week in the introduction about why I was interviewing her and what we were going to cover, but this episode specifically picks up where we left off, which is where she met the man who became my father. And this episode deals very specifically and in some detail about domestic abuse. And if this is something you have in your life, whether it's you or a friend or loved one, some of it might be hard to listen to. We stay away from some of the most graphic details that we actually discuss, but I cut a lot of that out, mostly because some of those wounds were really painful. And also I'm aware that some people may listen to this who have dealt with these things. And I wanted to make it as accessible as possible and as truthful without being overly painful. But this is not a total downer of an episode. There are a lot of pretty amazing things in here, mostly about perseverance. That's the word that I've decided really encapsulates this whole series I'm doing. The perseverance of struggle. And in the regular interviews I do, I'm normally interviewing entertainment figures, people who are creatives, who are authors, who are directors, writers, producers, some actors, and specifically talking about how they became who they are. That's what I'm curious to know, what motivated them, what made them tick. And then we also talk about, lessons learned and interesting facts about the present. And we're going to get to that with this series with my mom in next week's episode, which is basically her act 3. No story is complete without a third act, and she has a great third act. So if you've listened so far or you start today, regardless, this episode covers probably the most difficult parts of her story. And then next week's episode is the big uplifting finish, and there's still struggle and journey and discovery through it. And I don't want to spoil the plot, but I wouldn't have done this if there wasn't the third act that we have. That's part of what allowed me to do this, part of what motivated me to want to sit down in the first place. Please enjoy this show. Don't forget to visit my website. You can go to crazyinagoodway.com, and there's a bio there, but there's also a contact page. You can reach out and let me know what you think. I'd really love to hear from you. You can find me on all the social media networks as Brendan Davis or Brendan Keith Davis. My middle name is in there somewhere. But thank you for listening to this. Now, please enjoy round 2 with my mom, Ellen Shook.
And here comes this guy in this terrible rainstorm. And he had a suitcase, and he looked like he was really mad. And he walked up to the desk clerk and said, "I need a room, and I don't know how long I'll be here." And the first thing I ever noticed about him was his hands. He had beautiful hands, very long, slender fingers, and I noticed he was blonde, and he's kind of old, I thought. But anyway, I don't normally go in for blonde men. I like tall, dark, and handsome, like my present husband. But anyway, I noticed him, and so I made some kind of a wisecrack about something, and he turned around and looked at me like I was a roach that had just crawled out of the corner or something. And so anyway, that was your father. So anyway, didn't see him anymore. I remember having a few jokes when he took his bag and went off to his room, I guess.
Did he loosen up a little bit?
No, I didn't talk to him anymore then. I mean, they checked him in.
Yeah.
And that was that. Well, it turned out his wife, to whom he had been married less than 6 months, had thrown him out because he was mean and drunk and violent, and she'd had enough of it, so she threw him out. Smart girl. So I continued seeing my little soldier off and on. And then one night, one Friday night, or Friday night or Saturday night, I don't know, there was this joint across the street called the Partridge Inn. And it was kind of a disreputable establishment. The downstairs was a honky-tonk, and then the upstairs was sort of like short-term boarders, guys who were down on their luck, people who had been thrown out by their wives, and it looked sort of like a place in some little old English village. You know, kind of Tudorish stone.
Okay.
I don't even know if the thing's still standing or if it's fallen in by now. It was a relic then. You know, big pointy gables, and the
Yeah.
rooms had sloped ceilings, as I later found out. Well, it seems that your father had moved in over there. He'd only been at the Bon Air for a couple of days, and then
Okay.
he went over. Probably the rates were
Found
less
out.
or something.
Better.
And so Judy called and said she was at loose ends, that her little husband was not able to come home that weekend for something. I don't know, they were in the middle of finals or something. So anyway, we decided we would go out. We went and got something to eat, and then we decided we will stop in at the Partridge Inn, which we hear is a happening scene, and we ordered a drink, and it was a dive. And then who should come bopping up to our table but the guy that I saw
Yeah.
checking into the Bon Air? Probably had been a month at least, and I
Okay.
didn't remember him.
You hadn't really seen him since then. at all.
No,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
I never saw him again until he said, "You're that mouthy little woman that or something like that, mouthy chick that was at the desk clerk, you know, up there with
Yeah.
the desk clerk." And I said, "Guilty." And so he sat down and started buying us drinks, or I should say, putting them on his tab. He ran. I later found out, you know, as things kind of fell into place, that he ran bar tabs all over town till they cut him off, and then he'd just go somewhere else. But anyway, he got us some drinks, and then Judy decided she'd better go home, and she was going to take me home back to the Bon Air. And he said, "Oh, I'll get her home. I'll walk her home." It was across, basically catty-cornered across the Walton Way, the road. And she said, "I don't think that's a good idea." She had already sized him up.
Yeah, yeah.
But I guess I had enough of whatever I was drinking that I thought, "Oh, it'll be fine. Don't worry about it." So she left and giving me the side eye.
Kind of like, are you sure?
Yeah,
You're
and I
not-
should have gone. Biggest mistake I ever made.
Well, we wouldn't be having this conversation, so.
Well,
But you might be in Hollywood.
that didn't come up right away. No,
Mm.
I mean you were a little
Yeah.
ways off at that
Yeah,
point.
I assume.
But anyway, I started seeing him. He asked me out, and I actually still saw the other little guy too. But then he told me he got his orders and this and that and the other. And
Yeah,
I
ship
thought,
out.
I don't want to be married to a soldier. And your father was coming on rather strong at that point, and I thought he was quite exciting, and I thought his past was very exciting because he said he'd had 3 wives, but it turned out I was number 4 ultimately.
Really?
Oh yeah,
I didn't know there were that many. We'll have to sidebar about this off the mic a little bit.
Right.
You were number 4 for him?
Yes.
Okay. I'll have to revise my grand total. I guess that means he must
At
have
least 7.
I always said he had 7. I think that must
Maybe
be
he had
8 or 9. Wow.
I don't know. Who
Jesus.
knows? I
Anyway.
remember one time he made some wisecrack, "You know me, I'll marry anybody." Not to me, someone
Wow.
else when he was drunk. But anyway,
So that lady was not the mother of the 2 daughters. That was the one that was 6 months and kicked him out was not. She was a few
She was the
downstream.
one who had more sense than any of the rest of us. She
She was
kicked him to the curb.
She was a few downstream. Okay.
Well, one night, you know, after I had broken this poor little soldier boy's heart,
no.
I did. I've always felt so bad about that. Always hoped he came home from Vietnam. Check the war memorial. His name's not on there, so I guess he made it home.
All right, nice. So you and Clyde became a thing.
So we became a thing, and poor Herb got kicked to the curb
Mm.
and went to Vietnam.
Herb on the curb.
Herb on the curb.
So
And then
so
the next thing you know,
yeah. How long before I kind of popped into the oven? Did you
not
think?
too much longer.
Yeah.
And so then we.
I mean, were you? That's what I want to kind of understand. Were you sort of? I mean, you were basically just dating and stuff. Not a long time before I can.
No,
came
and
along.
then when I was waiting for him one night to come pick me up and he didn't come and I didn't see him all weekend, finally he comes crawling with his tail between his legs Monday and called me and said, I need to talk to you. And he said where I was is I was in jail. I got drunk and I went over to my old house. And Jana, the latest ex-wife,
Yeah.
had him arrested because he
Oh.
was frightening her, and I don't blame her.
Yeah.
So he spent the weekend in jail, and he told me all this sordid story. And so then it was right after that that I realized when I was throwing up in the mornings that something was terribly wrong here. And he knew because he had already been married to someone who had had 2 children and so he knew what was going to have to happen. So he hurried the divorce along, and he and I got married. And 7 months later, you arrived.
Well, how about that?
How about that?
So, were there any positives other than the occasional charming? I mean, this
Not
is
very many.
We've covered it a lot,
Not
and
very many.
he
He beat me up the first time when I was 8 months pregnant.
Jesus.
When you were an infant. I don't want to get into too much of this.
Sure.
But one day, I had to wash diapers.
So 8 months pregnant and then I'm born. Okay.
Yeah, then you were born and everything, and things seemed okay for about 3 weeks. But then he was up to his old tricks, and I think you weren't more than a couple months old.
Old tricks mean like running around and stuff?
He was probably doing that all along. But anyway, because he didn't come home, and he didn't come home sometimes. That's what happened when he beat me up, is I had the audacity to say, where were you?
Right.
But anyway, when he got fired from his job during all that time, he had a pretty decent job when I married him. He was with the newspaper over there, but he got fired. And so then he scrambled around and got some, but in the meantime, he really hung out in bars. He was always like that. He was a bar person. He liked people around. He liked lots of noise. He liked activity. He just did not need to be married, but he kept getting married anyway.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, there were casualties along the way, you and I being 2 of them. But the only ones by a long shot. But one day, I got up and the house was awfully cold, and you were crying. I picked you up and I tried to flip the light on. No lights. Our lights, our phone, our heat, our water, everything had been turned off. And here I am with a 2-month-old child. It's freezing cold. It's probably late February or something, because you were born the 5th of January.
Right.
I had to wash diapers. I had cloth diapers.
Sure.
I had to hang them on the clothesline. They would be frozen stiff. But anyway, that was my life. And so it was a long way from Hollywood. But I was doing the best I could, And so I didn't know where he was, and I couldn't call him. I didn't have a phone that worked. About 3 days later, he came home, but I had gone over to the neighbor's house and called your grandfather.
Okay.
And I said...
his dad?
Yes.
Okay.
I said, all the utilities are off. And he said, what do you want me to do about it? And I said, well, this is your grandchild. He's 2 months old. We're freezing. There's no food in the house. I have no money. I can't go anywhere. I said, do you want me to call my father and have him come over here and get me, or what? And then I guess something must have happened, because maybe they knew where to find him. I don't know. I don't know where he was.
Maybe he checked in with him. And
I doubt it. I doubt it.
Yeah.
But his father may have known how to find him. I don't know. Never knew what happened, but in about 24 hours, all the utilities were back on. And a day or 2 after that, he showed up. So, anyway, there was that.
Wow. So, part of why we're, wanted to do this, I mean, this is obviously one part very personal and sort of family biography, but we're doing this ultimately as a podcast because, I mean, I think your story of, where you're from and finding your way through the wilderness of the world to land at where you are, I think this is a relatable story, and I think it's an admirable story of how you just persevered. It's something that I take as a big part of my wiring of how I have continued to, try to swim upstream. And so in terms of you took me and we left, and I think I was either like right before, or right, I was almost 7 or just turned 7, as I remember it.
Many
but I want to get to you being a young mother in the 70s.
Right.
And so sum it up how you want to, but I want to get to you being all of a sudden it's you and you got me. but you get us there how you want to.
It was always you and me, and we kind of grew up together.
Yeah.
Because
you were 22 when I was born.
Right. And I was so ill-equipped. And I always felt like, God, I was such a horrible mother, and I warped you terribly.
I don't think you don't get much of the blame. You don't think you get much
Lord.
of the blame.
Well, it was like we were two kids in the wilderness finding our way along. I remember one time we were not with him, but you came to me and you said, I am a child. I'm tired. Put me to bed. You were about 6.
That's awesome. Really? Like you were like wrapped up in something and...
I don't know what. No, I think I had friends over, some neighbors or somebody had stopped by, and we were all.
But it's like I had to go remind you.
Like,
hi, I'm a child.
I'm a child. I'm tired. Please put me to bed.
Oh man, somebody listening to this might be crying, but I think that's really hilarious.
I know.
That sounds like something I would say.
Yes,
the first
you were
of many.
Always a very interesting little character, and you said the funniest things even when you were little.
Well, so and be that as it may, how did we get to the striking off into the wilderness together part?
Well,
or pick it up after that's happened.
Your father
I mean, you don't
couldn't
have
keep a job, so
Right.
we were always moving, and he would either get fired or something, and we would move, or he couldn't pay the rent, or we had owned a house and he couldn't pay the house payment, and we would get thrown out. I mean, it was always something like that. And I had never lived like this in my life.
Sure.
And I was like, just, it felt like a ping pong ball being batted back and forth, like from outside forces beyond my control. Boy, you talk about really far from Hollywood.
Well, yeah, and when you had this, boring though it was, you had like the definition of stability,
stable, safe.
The definition of safe and stable, and then this,
and then that. So then
it made the JT guy look solid in comparison.
Well, I mean, at least he was simple and easy to figure out.
Right.
Your father was anything but, and plus he was a mean drunk.
Yeah.
He was bright, but he was a mean drunk.
Yeah.
But he didn't have any sense. I mean, he was bright, but he just couldn't seem to figure out that these consequences of his own actions.
He kept doing the same thing.
He kept doing the same thing over and over, and inflicting all this damage on people around him.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's see. At this point, we had been, from Augusta up to North Carolina to Florida, back to North Carolina. And I had kicked him to the curb finally.
Mm-hmm.
Because, he just the violence escalated and he got worse, and you were having nightmares about him killing both of us and this and that and the other, and I just found that unacceptable. So I threw him out. And so we stayed there. School, I think, had just started or something about that time, and you were in the first grade.
Yeah, that's always my memory.
Yes, you went to parochial school.
Was I 6? Was it the fall before I turned 7, basically?
Yes, I think so, because...
My birthday's in early January for people listening.
Your birthday was a little late. You were a little late.
I was kind of like halfway in between.
Right, I mean, you'd been going to kindergarten since you were 3, pre-K and kindergarten.
Yeah, I remember that.
But...
I have vague memories of some of that.
Yeah. Well, I really loved Salisbury, but like I said, the social climate of the time was different too.
Yeah.
We obviously were outsiders. We were not old money, but there was a pretty active group of young married people that, everybody had parties and get-togethers, and there were little clubs and one thing, and they were always having dances and this and that and the other. And of course, a lot of them had grown up together and knew each other forever, like in the way of a lot of small towns.
Were these like small town country club kids or all
a lot
of
them were, but not all of them, no.
Yeah.
Of course, there was a college there where the theater group, the little theater group, was affiliated with that drama program.
And were y'all involved in that at the time?
Because
you both on and off, and he kept at it forever, actually.
Well, he kept at it. I kept at it a bit for a while, but then someone down the road came along and ruined the whole thing.
We'll get into that. But so y'all were involved in like the local theater and things like that. Okay.
And of course, the church, St. Luke's Episcopal, that was my favorite church that I've ever been affiliated with.
In Salisbury, North Carolina? Okay.
Yes, I liked that a lot. They had a great adult Sunday school class, and that's where some of our friends were that we knew. Or I should say my friends. None of them liked who. And, a lot of time, people back then still visited back and forth, still had dinner, invited other couples to dinner and did all that a lot more than they do now, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess now people tend to meet more in restaurants and things like that. But back then, supper clubs were very popular and that kind of thing. But anyway, that was the early 70s. Women's lib and all that stuff, was going strong. And women were becoming more assertive and feeling more a sense of themselves, less like they were an extension of the person they had married. And so, the whole structure of society was changing. And the war in Vietnam was still going on. And that made it got to the point you couldn't even watch the evening news anymore because it was just too tragic, which is getting, in this day and age almost the same way with all the shootings. But back then, it was like in the hundreds sometimes that the casualty count would be. And
like
then the next day it would be the same thing, Yeah. And so, it was almost like there was a cloud or something, like a collective air of depression or mania, like Nero fiddling while Rome burned, and the social mores were kind of going by the wayside. And a lot of people, I think divorce rate skyrocketed because so many women said, we've had enough of this shit and we're not going to take it anymore.
Right.
And so, of course, your father had always been a hound dog. He never wanted to be married. We cramped his style. He didn't.
Which is why he did it 8 times.
Probably. I mean, I guess he must have liked the idea, but the reality was uncomfortable or something. But anyway, my goal, I knew when I said I do that it was only going to be until you were old enough to go to school. And I knew when that last blow-up happened that was going to be it. And so you were about 6 and a half, I guess. School had just started, and so I decided, rather than pulling you out, because you were going to school with the kids that you had known for about 3 years, and that was kind of a record. We hadn't
been there that long?
We hadn't lived in the same house, but we had been in Salisbury for about 3.5 years, except for a detour for a few months to Florida.
I didn't realize it had been that long.
Yes.
And I vaguely remember Florida, but that's another story.
Oh, I know. Okay. Well, anyway, that's too much of a nightmare to get into here. But anyway, we moved we tried staying in that house, but it was a great big old barn of a place that he had moved us into, and I threw him out. And so we tried staying there, but there was no way I could afford to heat it. It wasn't very secure.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that some of those hobos and people who they kind of came and went in our house when we weren't there. And there were times when I would find doors open throughout the house that I hadn't left open. And you and I I had us closed off into it's kind of like a little 2-bedroom suite, had a bathroom between, and because the house was just so big, I think it had 18 rooms.
It was
or something.
for context. My dad he rented this is actually, as I remember, and even the handful of photos, this gorgeous, I mean, you would call it a mansion basically in downtown Salisbury.
And it's been restored.
Like a historic, and it's probably...
It was the old Woodson home, and it's been restored, and it looks beautiful now, but it was one of those fading grandeur, crumbling around the edges thing with ancient plumbing and lighting and all that sort of thing. But anyway, I don't want to dwell on that.
Sure.
But so we left. I found a little house to rent. A little brick bungalow down on Maupin Avenue, and you and I moved down there, and it was very nice. And the day we were moving in, a really tragic thing happened. Our next door neighbor's wife and child, who was your age, were killed in a wreck.
Yeah.
And I think that might have been, I want to say October, something like. I remember it was in the fall,
so
because
school
the
was
leaves
only a few
were
months
falling. Yeah, you were just
along.
barely into the first grade, and then that around that Christmas, the man came over, real sweet fellow, came over and brought you the bicycle that he had already bought for his little boy, the one who was killed. And he had some trees cut down in his yard, and then he had all that firewood. He chopped it up with his chainsaw, and we had an enclosed front porch. It was a glass enclosed porch, and he stacked enough wood to last us forever practically on that porch, which was great because up there people heated their homes with heating oil.
Yeah.
And it was very expensive, and I could only afford to buy enough heating oil for about a week. I couldn't afford to have the tank filled up. And so the truck would come every Saturday to give us some more to last us another week. And as you know, for the next 10 years, I chased your father for child support. And that started very early on, that he didn't do his duty. But that was no surprise, because he had 2 other children. He never supported them either. So, anyway, that's kind of about the end of that sordid chapter. That's about all I want to say, except that I had a job, didn't do very well at it, got fired, got another one. We managed to scrape by, and until I think about the 1st of May. School was not out for almost another month, but the nuns let you out because you had already completed all your workbooks. So you were just marking time, and I needed a job.
And you want to get out of there, basically?
At that point, I did. It was a small town. People gossiped, and then I discovered that some of my friends' husbands were coming out of the woodwork when I was suddenly a woman alone, and nobody around to protect me, I suppose. Or at least that particular line of defense of having a husband was gone.
Right.
So anyway, you went to live with my mother for a while, for the summer, throughout the summer, and I got down there as I could, but I went to Charlotte, found a job, and then moved down there. And that's where my friend Carolyn became a big help, because she helped me get moved down there.
Yeah.
And so I got a job at the Limited, and that's where I worked for a year. They just opened a store. And you came down in the fall to start to school. Well, after that first semester, you had decided you did not want to live there. I had to work nights a lot of times, and trying to find a babysitter was a nightmare.
Yeah.
And so, sometimes I tried taking you to work, and that didn't work out really well either, although I tried that again down the road and several other jobs. So I was assistant manager of the Limited, but it required really long hours.
Sure.
And so your father said that he would let you come and live with him, because you asked if you could go live with him. So then when it got ready to go and we had all your things packed, you said, I changed my mind. I don't want to go.
Yeah.
And I said, well, it's a little late now. So we let you go, and just to make sure that things were legal and all this kind of stuff, I did go see a lawyer about it, because I had filed for a legal separation. And so when we got to the custody part, we were giving him primary custody at that point, but it could it was in there that it could always be reversed.
Yeah.
And that I had liberal visitation.
Sure.
And so we left it that way. And you hadn't been down there too long.
Was it just like 3, 4, or 5 months before? We don't have to get into the whole
No, not
sordid
yet.
thing.
We
but
won't do that right now. But what I was going to say is, I remember going down there to see you at Christmas. I had this boyfriend who was a drug dealer. Although, I didn't partake of any of his wares. He thought I was very square, but whatever. He bought me a plane ticket to go down there to see you. And of course, you hadn't been gone that long, but he knew that I missed you terribly. Yeah. And so I saw you, and then it was the hardest thing I ever did to go back, but I knew that there was no way I could live with your father again.
Sure.
So anyway, the reason for this legal separation was, I don't know what the laws are like now, but at the time in North Carolina, you only could get a divorce on the grounds of a year and a day's separation unless there was some exigent circumstance, like I suppose your life was in danger or something.
Yeah, you didn't
like
just have at will.
You couldn't just go and get a no-fault divorce.
Right, and so you had to start marking the time. You had to put it on the record.
Right,
and then
so
let the days pass.
Once it was on the record, the clock was ticking. But by that time, I got myself transferred to Atlanta.
That's right, because you were there.
Yes, I went to another job. I got another job with a rival competing.
Was that Brooks?
Yes, Brooks Fashion. It was lovely, defunct company that they are now. But anyway, I got a job, and you came back to live with me. And I don't really want to get into all that mess, but it was a very
he left me with a caregiver who didn't give care, and you had to rescue
your grandfather, your paternal grandfather, yes. And so I had to come and get you, and you never went back to live with him. So that was the end of that sordid chapter, and then eventually, I think it was maybe.
Yeah, we were in Atlanta for a while. This seems like the southern
Well, yes, it was a
southern suburbs,
Morrow,
Georgia.
Mm-hmm. And I think your father's place was further south in Stockbridge.
Yeah, he was. It wasn't. Wasn't super far away. Now that I'm an adult and have been in Atlanta. But he didn't
really exercise his visitation. Yeah. He was supposed to have you every other weekend because of my work schedule. Mm-hmm. I was still working in retail.
Well, I remember being, and it's not a knock on you, but I remember being an original latchkey kid, and then having had my house key on literally around my neck on a piece of string.
When we lived in Morrow,
6 or 8 months into that life, all of a sudden, it was Time Magazine had some kid that like that, defining the term for the first time. But I was the one before there was even a term.
There were so many, I guess.
I had tons of friends. I mean, I'd go home and there'd all be all my other friends with single parents in the apartment complex.
Right.
That we would see each other.
I had a nice neighbor for a while, and she had a little boy about your age, and y'all used to play together a lot. I have pictures of you on New Year's Eve with y'all sitting in a laundry basket, toasting each other with Coke.
Nice.
At midnight.
I'm sure having a Coke at midnight felt very dangerous.
Oh, yes. Well, he was kind of a hyperactive kid anyway.
Sure, we got along famously, but so how long were we sort of? You're in Atlanta, so that being a single mom. I mean, highlights, lowlights.
It was tough.
It's mostly tough. But
yes, and then I quit Brooks Fashions. And let's see, what did I do after that? Oh, I got hired by this outfit called Fashion Conspiracy, which didn't last very long, but it was another one of those junior women's girls' clothing stores. So anyway, I did that, and then I left them, and my next job was a radical switch, something I'd never done. I think school was out at that point, but it had to do with the economy. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't get a job anywhere. I mean, there were just no jobs. And that was in the mid-'70s, 76, 77, something like that. And so I got a job working as a cocktail waitress, of which I didn't know anything about it, but they hired me, I suppose, because they thought I looked cute in the outfit. But anyway, at least I was home during the day, and I could get you. And I mean, what went by the wayside was sleep. I was temping. Yeah. I had, at the time we left Atlanta in the beginning of 1979, I think we left around right after New Year's, right before school started, or around the time the second semester of school was starting, we left. And at that point, we were living in Stone Mountain. because I just had it with that South Atlanta area.
Yeah.
I hated it. And Stone Mountain at that time was nice, and so I thought we'd be safer. And so
But do you have like 2 or 3 jobs? Is
I
my
had 5
recollection?
or 6 jobs that overlapped. I had
Yeah.
temp jobs that I would go to 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, work a dinner shift somewhere, and then go for a late night shift. And I would be running back and forth flying down the freeway in my car at Stone Mountain to make sure you had something to eat, because you would have to come home and get off the bus. But it got to the point that I decided maybe that wasn't, I mean, it just wasn't sustainable,
Sure.
because I was getting about 2 hours sleep a night.
Sure.
And so we left, and that at that point, I decided it was time to eat crow and go home, back to my home in Anniston. And I was terribly afraid something was going to happen to you, being in that apartment complex by yourself late at night, because I would run after my dinner shift. I would run back to the cocktail lounge, the other one, and work till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
And then I'd have to get up at 6 to get you to school again. And I mean, it was just not sustainable. And then, plus I was afraid something was going to happen. One night somebody followed me home from my job about 2 o'clock in the morning. And I did not dare go to my apartment because
you don't know where you live.
I mean, you were in there asleep, and I mean that guy followed me all the way from when I left my job.
Wow.
And I just drove around in that. I mean, that was all the way back to Stone Mountain. See, that job was Daphne's. It was called. It was down there in Hapeville. It was a Sheraton hotel.
And, no way.
It was close to the airport.
That's where I owned a house before. When I moved to LA, I still owned a house there.
That old building was still there, but it was no longer a Sheraton. It was something else, and it looked like a dump. It wasn't.
Yeah, I'm sure it
It was a pretty nice hotel, I think, when I worked in the lounge
Yeah.
and dining room there. But anyway, I drove around the apartment complex trying to think, well, I don't know where the police station is. I don't know exactly what to do except keep driving or go back out of the complex and see if I can find some kind of a public place that's open. But of course it was 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever. But I mean, there was no way
Had you seen the guy in the car? Could you see the guy in the car and you recognized him from the place?
No, but it was 2 guys.
Okay.
And so I couldn't get that
and
good a look at
you
him.
realized they'd follow you.
Yeah. Because every time I'd pass, when I thought, I think that guy's following me on the freeway coming home, and then I would pull over, I would make some kind of a maneuver, and they would stay right behind me. And then when I turned off into Stone Mountain, I thought, uh-oh, and then I kept going, and I think it seemed like there was sort of a country road or something, not a country road, but, it was a wooded little crooked road before we got to the complex. And I turned in, and they turned in too. We were the only 2 cars. And I thought, this is no coincidence. I know. I was very frightened.
Yeah.
And so I just kept driving around through the complex, and I thought, I'm not stopping the car, even if I have to ram those people. And I was in a little car, which they were driving a truck, which, I probably would have been toast if I'd tried ramming them, but I thought I would do something to get attention.
Right.
Sit on the horn, whatever I needed to do. They should have had cell phones. But they didn't. But anyway,
a couple decades from that.
Yeah. So anyway, not long after that, we went home. I think it was Christmas, and I talked to my parents about moving back there. My father didn't like the idea. I think he'd gotten older at that point. He'd had heart trouble for quite a while, and I think he just didn't want the upheaval in his house. He was older. He was retired. He just wanted peace and quiet that he was used to, and it was well deserved. I mean, the man had worked hard all his life.
Yeah, he was the postmaster at the post office.
One of those satellite offices
in
Blue Mountain, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was not the downtown. He'd worked in the downtown office for years. But anyway, push come to shove, we moved. He came around. He went over. He sent a Mayflower truck over there. Got our stuff. I broke my lease. And then we moved in with them, and I promptly came down with double pneumonia because I was so fried.
You could finally relax, and then
everything
everything
and I had my mommy
you,
taking care of me, and I just kind of became a puddle there for about a month. I got over it and then had a relapse. In the meantime, you started to school over at 10th Street School. And I'll never forget what you said to me that first day. I guess you'd been to so many new schools. I think you went to a new school about every 6 months or something. But
Yeah.
anyway, I pulled up in the front.
Am I going to have to beep this? Or is
No, it was so funny. It was one of the funniest things you ever said. I pulled up and I said, wait a minute, I've got to park. I'm going to come in with you because it's your first day. And you go, no, I'm going by myself. And for God's sakes, don't kiss me.
Okay. Awesome. All right. That could have been. Yeah, that's pretty.
So
that's
you
pretty
went
funny.
to school, and I got over the pneumonia. My father had gotten us a little apartment, and we had not moved in it though. He was down there painting and cleaning and fixing.
Yeah, it was.
That little
It was
place on
pretty
Bird Street.
ramshackle, as I
Well,
recall.
it was a
but
little
I mean,
duplex, but it was
yeah.
about a block from their
Yeah.
house. We stayed with them while I was sick, and we were getting
Right.
sort of the place just really wasn't ready, and I think it didn't even have a stove and a refrigerator.
Oh.
He went out and bought us one.
Okay.
Yeah, he had that done, and he paid the rent
Yeah.
because I didn't have a job. But I filed for unemployment, and back then, I don't know how it is now. I think I got about $100 a week, and you had to go pretend to file for
Right.
apply for
You had to
3
look for
jobs
jobs,
every
right,
week.
right.
So I did
There's still
that.
requirements like that. Only it's harder to cheat it. It's
Oh.
harder to fake it.
Well, I wasn't really faking it. I was sick as a dog.
Sure. Yeah, it's harder to. Yeah.
And I might point out that my typing skills had not really developed at that point. I had to basically teach myself to type later on.
Yeah, you became quite a whiz at it, as I recall. But that's later.
Yeah, that was on down the road. Well, I got a job. Let's see, what did I do? Oh, in Birmingham, a retail job. But I had to drive back and forth. And I had, my older cousins that lived out in Fairfield at the time. Eileen and TJ still lived in a great big old house they had out there for years before they retired and moved down to Montevallo.
We're in Birmingham right now, and that's about an hour and a half from Anniston, depending on traffic, I guess.
And
right?
where you are in Birmingham.
Right.
Well, where they lived was in West Birmingham. And so we had to, I had to go flying down I-20, and my parents didn't want me driving back late at night because I had to work till 10 o'clock a lot of nights.
Mm-hmm.
I had a job. It was in the old Eastwood Mall
So
over
you
there on
stayed
the
with
east
them
side of Birmingham.
sometimes.
So I had to drive sometimes, when I worked late, I had to drive from the east side of Birmingham over there to the far west side where Fairfield is. But anyway, TJ would be waiting for me on the porch when I worked late because I always let him know when I was coming.
Yeah.
But I had to work late 2 or 3 nights a week, and when I did, I stayed over there, and then you stayed at my parents'. So, I mean, our lifestyle was very unsettled, to say the least. And, of course, in the meantime, I had gotten involved with Little Theater before I ever got a job.
Right.
So I continued to do things there for several years in their community theater group, but that's where I met somebody else.
Yes.
Who turned out to be...
Yeah,
he
had
was
some
very-
surprises.
Yes, I had a couple of rude shocks. But he was very nice to you in the beginning, before we got married. And about as soon as we said I do, then he became the world's biggest asshole. And did not treat you well at all. But then we'd been married, a year and a half, something like that. And he decided to quit his job and go back to school and get an MFA. And so we moved. He went first I stayed. I had a job. By then, I had a job I really enjoyed. It was downtown in a Belk store.
Right.
I had the Estee Lauder counter.
Right.
And I really enjoyed being the counter manager for Estee Lauder because I also got to travel a little bit as a makeup artist from time to time. Not enough to interfere with our lives too much. And then we, continued to do Little Theater because, even if I had to work late, it was only till about 8 o'clock. It wasn't like had to work late and then hang around another hour settling up accounts and anything like that.
Right.
So anyway, life was better.
Yeah,
it was different and very different after I had by that point in my life I had traveled some and I'd lived in some different places, some bigger cities and so forth and so on and
yeah, you had a range of experience.
Yes, I had Charlotte,
small town
Atlanta,
U.S.
New Orleans,
so not really.
Yeah, it felt, it was a little constraining, and it was a little hard to get used to the fact that everybody knew your business and
Right.
wanted to have a say-so, and what they didn't know, they just made up and talked about. But anyway, things were not going well in the marriage. That was pretty obvious.
So
And so we moved to,
yeah.
finally we did move down to Oxford, Mississippi. And oddly enough, I liked Oxford quite a lot.
Yeah. I remember it pretty
Estee
well.
Lauder found me a place down there,
Yeah.
and so I had that counter down there in Nelson's department store, which was another whole story by itself. But it seems that while we were living apart, although he did come home occasionally, mainly to see his mother probably, but he came out of the closet.
But, well, he came out of the closet before you moved?
Well, he was living, maybe not real openly at that point, but it was very obvious that he was living a gay lifestyle. He would go off.
When you moved? When we moved down?
Yeah.
Oh.
On Wednesdays, I discovered he had a standing thing with one guy that they went to Memphis every Wednesday and spent the day and had dinner, and he came back far into the night. Oh, yes. There were a lot of things you didn't know. You were a child.
Okay. I mean, I knew a lot. I didn't know that.
Adolescent at that point, but I think you had made a little buddy or two, and
yeah.
I mean, it was a very pleasant place to live. We were not part of the landed gentry with the old money or anything, but it was a pleasant little town.
Ole Miss is certainly in the history books for an awful lot of racist bullshit and some pretty horrible moments in history, but beautiful place. William Faulkner's from there. Complicated man, but amazing writer.
Well, let's talk about Oxford briefly.
Well, yeah.
I really enjoyed my clientele.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting thing. One of my best buddies there was a guy who worked over in the men's department who happened to be a black guy. And he and I stood together in front of the store along with several other people because we had employees of both races there, and we all got along quite well. And I saw my first, and thank God only, KKK demonstration on the square.
What?
Yes. There was a big KKK rally out on the square in front of the courthouse in Oxford, Mississippi when we were living there. You were probably in school.
What was that like, standing with your friend?
We were standing there laughing at them because somebody in the crowd, somebody in our group said, "Oh, just a bunch of hillbillies from Water Valley." Which I gather was like kind of a rural community.
Yeah.
I really don't recall ever going to Water Valley, and I'm sure it's probably a lovely place. But anyway, I guess it was a little country town or something,
A lovely place with some not so lovely people.
Yeah, right. But anyway, that was one thing that I do remember about Oxford. But anyway, moving along, that's where this so-called marriage, which hadn't been a marriage in a very long time, kind of came to a head.
Yeah.
And he announced he wanted to divorce and ran upstairs and jumped in bed and pulled the covers up over his head. And I followed him up and I said,
"Wow.
Well, you used to call him Gertrude."
Why did I? Yeah, I remember
that. Because that crazy Christmas play, the musical that they did.
Did he play some cross-dressing role?
Cinderella. Yes, okay. He played one of the wicked
played the role,
stepsisters.
And I kept calling him that.
And that was his name. And I don't know who wrote that thing. It was a thing that the theater group did every single year, mainly for kids. And it was a musical. It was a spoof on Cinderella. And the wicked stepsisters were always played by men.
Yeah.
And so, yes, he was Gertrude. And so you always called him Gertrude because he was such a bitch anyway.
Wow.
But anyway, yes. And so I had followed him up the steps, and I said, "What did you say?" And he said, "I want a divorce," and covered his head up again. And I remember I told my mother, and of course she told everybody in her beauty shop in Anniston, Alabama, and the story was all over town in about 5 minutes. But so I went, I didn't know what to do, so I went home to my mother, where I always went.
Yeah.
And so we sat and plotted about what we were going to do, and she said, "Why don't you go out to Colorado?"
Had we moved out of Oxford then? Did you?
Well,
moved and regrouped.
She took you. I think I took you.
Yeah, I remember going back so you could deal with Bill and closing out.
And then I had to come back. And you stayed with her. Yeah. And then she came down when I was leaving. My brother came from Colorado to meet us down there, because she ordered him to. And then he took me to Colorado, and that was another whole story. I loved Denver.
Yeah.
That place where
Yeah.
he lived over there, Grand Junction, that was like the far side of the moon. I thought I had died and gone to hell. He took me over there for like a week or something,
Yeah.
you know, and we found an apartment. We got back to Denver. He knew people. We stayed with them.
Yeah.
And we went out and found an apartment. I opened a bank account. The craziest thing happened. I hadn't had any child support from your father. God knows how long, years probably. And that was always a bone of contention with Gertrude, so we'll just call him Gertrude from now on. But anyway, I think literally like the day or two before I was leaving, and everything was packed and the arrangements were made, and I was staying with my mother she was at the Holiday Inn, and then Randall showed up in Oxford, and I was just staying with her rather than in the apartment with him, and a check showed up from your father's lawyer, and I think it was like around $1,000. I want to say,
which would have been several.
Well,
months.
It was a drop in the bucket,
right? But that would have been several. That would have been months.
But yeah,
worth,
it was at least some money.
And I think was that also when because I didn't talk to him for years. Was that also when he sent me like some little electronic video game? He sent me like little. There was a time where all of a sudden he sent me.
If he did, he made
and I don't care about basketball, but it was like some kind of like a handheld Coleco type. It was like a little handheld game, like a PlayStation type.
That at all. Anyway, Randall and I went to Colorado.
So you had a little bit of money, more than you expected.
Well, more than I expected to have. I had my last couple of paychecks, and then that. And do you know that Gertrude was about to change his mind when that little check showed up? He took every dime I had. Every time I got a paycheck, he took it. I shouldn't have surrendered it. He would, one time I asked if I could have $5 for lunch money that week, and he said, no, you can pack your lunch just like I do. He said, I've been walking around with the same dollar in my pocket for 3 weeks. When any money did come, I don't know, money was always a big problem. He was so tight he squeaked when he walked. He was just pathological about money.
Yeah, okay.
But anyway, that's neither here nor there.
We're in Denver now. Or you're in Denver.
Yeah, so I'm in Denver. I have a job. It was fun. Kind of enjoyed. Actually, I had a retail job. Well, I mean, I got that right away, working in cosmetics. Walked into several department stores and got several offers, and I took the one that I thought would be the most manageable for where this crappy little apartment was.
Yeah.
And we lived out in
Stone Mountain.
It's not
Green Mountain.
No, not Lakeside, Lakeshore. No, that's not it. I can't think. Lakewood.
Lakewood, that's right.
Colorado.
Lakewood, Colorado. The community was called Green Mountain because that's where I went to school.
Yeah, the school was Green Mountain clearly. Where you went to school, right?
And we were in Green Mountain was like a upper middle, mostly an upper middle class place, and we were in like the poor people apartment at the
yeah, we lived in one of the shitty apartments.
And I remember like a couple of different people. That the one little girl I dated a couple times. The one time her dad took me home, and it's like, is it okay to leave you here? I'm like, this is where I live. It's like, oh, that was the last time I saw his daughter.
I'm sure. But anyway, I had 2 jobs there for a while. I kept the retail job on weekends, and I told him I couldn't do nights, or maybe one night, maybe Friday night or something if I had to, but I didn't want to. But anyway, I would work my job in an office, which was over on Capitol Hill, in downtown Denver. So I was driving and then back out to Lakewood, and then. You had made some buddies, though, out there. And you seemed to be doing okay for a while. Yeah,
that's where I won't go down the rabbit hole, but my became one of my longest and deepest friendships with my friend who was then going by his birth name of Scott, and guitar player. And I had a friend before him who was a really great buddy, and I got a job working in a music and record. I was a cashier and selling records and tapes, and I talked about this whole experience a bit in detail with Carl King on his podcast, because there's so many like random like brushes with people who became relevant later. The singer Kip Winger of the band Winger that had a bunch of hits in the 80s and stuff, he taught guitar at that store where I worked. Wow. Before he went to LA and became like a famous, session and tour bassist, and then became a rock star on his own. But yeah, I used to like, take money from the kids, like, because I manage, among other things. It was like all paper records. You didn't have really computers, So I would take, kids would prepay for like 5 or 10 lessons with Dave or Bill or Kip, and I'd track it, and then somebody come in for their lesson, and
Right.
and I pay the teachers,
Well,
their
I
part.
have to put this in, and you have to leave this part in the interview. We still didn't get any child support regularly, and even with my 2 jobs, there were times that you bought the groceries with your little paycheck.
Yeah, I remember.
So,
I remember. And
Anyway.
but yeah, we were this really was me and you against the world. I mean, what I
It
thought
was.
about, doing this is not the idea of putting this out for other people to hear the edited version. I think our story is probably, a lot of people have their version of this kind of story.
Oh, I'm sure.
And you don't hear them really. And I think it's your perseverance. I don't sound like I'm wrapping up yet, but the perseverance you had is something that I also took, and that I have to this day. Before we got started, there's like
But
a
I got that
there's like a
from my
biz.
parents because,
Yeah.
I think I mentioned yesterday when we were talking, people of that generation, no matter how bad things were, they just got up and dusted themselves off and went on with it. And
Right.
that's what I
Yeah.
guess I had to do.
Yeah.
Well, I will point out
Yeah.
something that was really pivotal to my
Yeah.
growth and development was when we were in Oxford, I started back to school for the first time. After 19 years.
Yeah.
I had dropped out of college
Right.
after 1 year from my jailbreak marriage.
You were working and had
And-
me and had the figuring out he's gay husband, and you
And
started
I
back to
went
college.
school, yeah. So
Yeah.
I went 3 semesters, as much as I could get. And so then we got to Colorado. You decided after about a year to go visit Clydola. And you were gone for a while, and then you said, well, you weren't coming back.
So when did you start taking classes in Colorado? Was it while you were working and I was out there with you, or was it after I moved?
I believe it was when you decided to go live with Clyde.
Okay,
that was the second year.
And kind of the quick setup on this that we just had a part that I've just deleted for the audience is we were trying to figure out the chronology, because I was a kid, you're an adult, and time is what it is, and memory is what it is. So basically, after 3, 4, 5 years of me wanting nothing to do with him and him not having anything to do with me, apparently back when we were still in Anniston, Bill,
Gertrude.
Sweet William, was the one to reach out to Clyde and basically say, you need to take him for a while. But so that had reinitiated contact. I also remember at a certain point getting a birthday card in this little handheld basketball video game. And I remember very specifically because I don't care about basketball now, frankly. I've enjoyed going to some games. I don't follow it to watch it. And like, well, this is like, it was just, the point is this evidence to somebody who doesn't know me. It's like, if you knew me, that'd be the last thing you'd get me but nonetheless, it was a birthday card and it was this video game thing. So the point is that I visited a summer and actually had fun. He was finally doing well, seemingly, and went out of his way to be entertaining. And at the time was remarried to a former Slavic princess of some kind who
Hungarian.
was Hungarian. Okay, and she was Ilona, and anyway, it was an entertaining time. And I went back, to live with you. And then the following summer, I also visited and made a handful of friends. Like, he had a couple of his buddies who had sons my age. And so actually Brent, who became my on and off friend forever and roommate on and off through college, and even when he moved to LA, he became my roommate for a while. Our dads knew each other. So I knew Brent before I had moved down to South Georgia. So the bottom line, so getting us to the current is, so you're in Colorado, we're there a year, and I'm visiting down there. And that was the summer. I think that was just the second summer. I think I'd only done one summer before the summer that I went and I stayed. But basically it was really hard was really hard for us in Colorado. I saw how hard you're working. Yeah, I started working at the minute I could get a work permit, basically. You took me to get a work
15,
permit,
yeah.
and I was working. I was in 10th grade, and I was working 30, 35 hours a week, whatever the maximum allowable by law was. I was
It wasn't
working.
that many. I think it was 20. That's all they.
Well, it felt like a lot because I
I'm
was
sure.
also teaching guitar lessons on my own and doing other things.
And then I
helping.
got a call from your counselor about your grades dropping.
That
and
was
falling asleep in
amazing.
school.
Well, that was. It's ultimately all on me.
She wanted not really. She wanted you to quit your job, and I said, I hate to tell you, but we wouldn't be eating part of the time if he didn't have a job.
Yeah. Well, and I creatively, it was one of the most important times in my life because, though there are tales upon tales that can be told about my friend then known as Scott, genius and creatively incredibly gifted, and turned me on to an array of music that I probably would not have even all discovered today at this point. So my own fluency, because I was a semi-professional rock guitar player for about half a career as a young guy. And people who don't know this part of me have maybe seen old photos. but you know.
I like the hair.
Well, thank you. Well, it's
not the earrings, not so much.
What's left of it is coming back now. But so there were a lot of good things about Denver, and it was really progressive. My language arts teacher, Mr. Starkey, he and his wife were the coaches. I'm sure they're definitely two old hippies, and I'm sure he was, what I know now, he was probably baked half the time. Walked around,
That's pretty good.
Walked around barefoot. We all sat in a circle, and we all had lap desks.
Oh.
We didn't have like desks and chairs. And
it was quite unstructured coming from the deep south.
It seemed like every other day was either like some kind of show and tell or some kind of group meditation or a philosophy type lesson. And he was a brilliant guy. And I really remember, because I tested into, that was the one class that I aced. My grades were god-awful because I just didn't care and I was too busy. I wasn't running around drinking or smoking dope or anything yet. But I went to school. I didn't skip school. I just couldn't, certain other classes, I just could. Some of the classes were super jockey. Like several of the teachers, like my geometry teacher. It's ironic because geometry is a type of math that I actually got really affinity for in college, but I almost failed that they only gave me a D just to get me out of the class.
Well, I got a D minus, so they'd get rid of me when I took geometry. It made no sense.
But I remember that the teacher was some like super jockey asshole who was one of the coaches as well, and I just, there are some of these people I couldn't click with. But anyway, this is all, I don't mean to make this so much about me, but to say that I specifically, I'm trying to say there were some positives, right? And my little rock and roll life with working at that music store, it was also hard because I commuted by bus. It was a long way away. But I had pocket money. I was able to go to Chuck E. Cheese. I was able to go and have fun a little bit, which was great. And I had my musician friends and some older friends who were great musicians and got to meet the future. Got to meet Kip Winger before he was Kip Winger, which was kind of funny. So bottom line is, though, when I went down there to visit my dad over the summer, that's when I got to be closer with a couple of those kids of his friends who were my age or close to it. And also it was hard because those winters I remember having to.
You did not like the cold
I
weather.
remember having to like sleeping with gloves full of thick ass hand lotion with socks, actually, like tube socks and like hands caked in hand lotion sometimes.
That apartment, our dumpy apartment where we lived, one time, they had a blizzard.
Oh.
We went through, I think, 2 blizzards during that, and we also both got some horrible flu.
Yeah.
But the heat, it was so cold.
Like
the heat never got over 55 degrees in the apartment, even though it was tiny, and normally you'd think a place that small would be toasty.
I remember being
there were
sick.
No insulation.
I remember the hands, just the finger cracked and bleeding from the cold all the time, constant. Yeah, so it was physically really hard. I was working my ass off, and that summer that I visited was, in retrospect, it was actually, I caught him at the tail end of like probably his most successful period of his life. Like that was probably the period where, like, whatever his, whatever he was going to fulfill as his destiny of success, he was in the tail end of having had it for 5 minutes, and it hadn't visibly fallen apart yet. So the promise, and frankly, I saw how hard it was on you. I was keenly aware. I mean, I feel like you did your best to insulate me from the horrors of your life as much as you could. And of course, we shared a lot of really difficult experiences. And I've always given you extraordinary credit for things. And you've always said, I don't, you've had your own responses to this and not feeling worthy.
Village. If I hadn't had my parents, and then fortunately, so I guess some of your friends' parents kind of stepped in. I remember the Youngs took you to Vail or someplace for a week.
They did.
I
went to Vail with Scott's parents.
You got to do some things that I couldn't. That
was really great. I ate lunch over there almost every day. Or after school, I should say. I had lunch at school, but after school, I'd go to his house. And in terms of me moving, though, I mean, back to our story here, we're getting to my next bullet point is freedom from raising me day to day. What'd that feel like? And that's where I'm going for you, because this is your interview. I just want to say, for the sake of you hearing it, and whatever makes it in the actual cut of this, I don't know. But bottom line is that, I had my own reasons. I was moving toward the promise of an easier life, and also thinking, it was part of my calculus on all this stuff that you were gonna have. It was better for you if you didn't have to take care of me, and you were not at all making me feel like I was a problem. But I was aware of what you were dealing with, and so I thought, what, this is gonna be. I mean, I put all this together later.
Well, I talked it over with a counselor.
Yeah.
And she told me, she said, you're living in that little crammed up apartment, and you may get a bigger one, but it won't be that much better because you just don't have any money. She said he needs a father figure, and sometimes even one who is not very good is better than none.
Right.
And he's never really been a presence for Brendan. And she said, what you have to understand about a 16-year-old boy is that he's becoming a man, and he needs a man. He needs his father. And said it's very confusing for him to have a lot of the feelings that he's having, and he's crammed up in this tight space with his mother. And especially one who doesn't look like she's really old enough to be his mother and that sort of thing. And she said he may not even be aware of that consciously, but she said this is not a good situation for him to be in, or you for that matter.
Okay.
And so
was she saying she thought I was going to rape you or something?
No,
this is kind of strange.
No.
I was with you, and then
But it was like, that she said this is not something that consciously. But she said that this is something that he's aware of, and it's probably troubling him to some degree, even if he's not really aware that it's troubling to him. Because I told you, we used to think it was funny that people think that you were my date when we went somewhere.
And that happened
several times.
That happened
even from the time you were about 15
but
years
a
old.
Long time, though, like throughout our lives.
Right, but anyway... But anyway, so I won't say against my better judgment, but I thought, okay, I'm outnumbered here. So I let you go because he promised he'd send you to a good school, and I guess he did.
Yeah.
Although, I did have some calls from the headmaster, but where's the money? And I said, I told you I can't pay this because I'm not the one who put him in that school. So deal with Mr. Davis on this.
Okay, that seemed like as good a place as any to leave this. We're going to pick up Act 3 next week from where we left off today. Thank you again for listening. Don't forget to reach out, find me online, let me know your thoughts, your feedback. Please share this episode with anyone you think would enjoy listening to it or would benefit from hearing it. And especially when we have the next episode, if you listen to all 3, you'll hear a pretty remarkable journey in total. I am so appreciative of my mom for allowing me to do this with her and sitting down to do this. It meant a lot to me. I hope you got something out of it. Thanks for listening. I'm Brendan Davis, and I'll see you next week.